with the country's staggering unemployment rate, job seekers sometimes get so desperate that they try to spice up their CVs to become more marketable. Lying about one's qualifications is tantamount to fraud. Now, a recent example is that of the Johannesburg Roads Agency CEO, who was fired for misrepresenting his educational qualifications. Well, to help us understand the implications of lying on one's CV, we're joined by Cynthia Schoeman. She's the Managing Director of Ethics Monitoring and Management Services. Cynthia, good morning to you. It's a public holiday. You saw it fit to come into studio to discuss this important subject.
It's a pleasure.
It's so important, isn't it?
The
implications of lying on one's CV. Let's perhaps start with the implications.
Well, I think the crucial point is your introduction of saying, at a level, given unemployment rates, you can almost understand it. But the challenge in terms of the implications is that since 2019, this has been a criminal act. It's actually in our legislation, and you can brush it aside and say, well, you know, you can get a fine or you can get imprisonment for up to 5 years, and you can say, yeah, that's not going to happen. Actually, the reality is that last year, there was a huge fine issued by the KZN High Court for someone who purported to be an engineer. So here we are looking at fines, but much more importantly for the individual, actually, if it comes out, you're looking at a criminal record.
True. And you remind me, actually, of an interview I once did in a completely different platform many moons ago. A fellow who said he was an engineer at PRASA.
Yes.
Had to go to court.
Yes.
It was a huge embarrassment. I sat with him in studio across, just like with you right now, and you could tell that there just wasn't an answer forthcoming. But that's at a very high level.
Exactly.
Let's start this at the entry point. We have a country that is struggling with putting people into jobs.
Yes.
And so people get desperate. What do you say to a person who's so desperate to get a job that it is within reach, but that paper that they so desperately need is simply not there? How do you tell that person, don't do it?
I think that is always a challenge, because what the individual's looking at is the very real short-term gain of saying, but you know, if I can just get this job, then it feels like everything will be all right. And I think the lesson we should be sharing where we can is, what about the long-term consequences? If we think of, you know, some of the high-profile examples, you just raised the head of engineering at PRASA. When that was uncovered, the person didn't only lose a job, but they lost credibility, the reputation, and that applies equally in terms of young people. Again, I mean, a detail of the legislation is that where a fraudulent qualification is uncovered, the employer's not forced to, but they are requested to please register that information with SAQA, you know, the Qualifications Authority, where the person is then recorded, so in effect entering a blacklist. Now, this is not to say that all employers do this, but the real challenge, as is the case with so many, if you want, areas of ethical temptation, is that short-term benefit seems irresistible, and the failure is to look at the very long-term costs of having been established as someone who passed on fraudulent information.
Yeah. And then this scales up, if you will. So we look beyond now the entry level, where this is someone who is looking for a job, a first-time job seeker. They don't have the necessary qualifications, and so they decide that they're going to act fraudulently. But then this happens at a much higher level.
Exactly.
You have a CEO from the JRA, Johannesburg Roads Agency, who's just been fired. I think he has an opportunity to appeal or something like that, but the point is that he was given ample time to explain himself. I guess he simply could not back up his qualifications that he claimed he had. Why do people want to commit fraud at that level?
Again, it's always for what's the potential gain for the individual. And when you can claim to have that master's, or even better, have that doctorate, it can serve you very well in terms of promotions. And let's quickly add that when we're looking at a promotion, we're almost always looking at a salary increase as well. So again, it is, as you say, improving your CV to improve your future prospects and to benefit yourself. This is not as if there's no harm done. This is for personal benefit.
Yeah.
And we can think of, a number of high-profile examples. As we said a moment ago when we were chatting, I mean, Dr. Pallo Jordan did not have a doctorate.
Yeah.
And that was really, I feel like saying it's sad. He resigned from Parliament, he resigned from the ANC NEC. But when we say that's sad, I remember that was an example where a lot of people said, but, he's extraordinarily bright and so wise. And yet I also say, getting a fake doctorate or any fake degree, this is not a mistake. There wasn't a misunderstanding. This is intentional fraud.
It's so complicated in the South African context, and I'm saying that deliberately because time and again, things are seen in this country through the racial prism. Because, yes, there are those that have been found out and they are paraded for all to see. But then you find people, I remember I think when Mango still existed, there was a CEO there who had a standard 10, and people were saying, but why aren't you in the media making a big hoo-ha about that person? Where is there a fine line between saying experience versus the actual paper that I am a qualified person who can be employed at a high enough level as a CEO, perhaps?
I think you make an excellent point that there is this risk we fall into of placing far too much emphasis on a formal academic qualification and failing to say, for goodness sake, the person's had 15 years of experience. They are doing superb work. And so I don't even want to put it under the banner of recognition of prior learning, but the skills and experience that we get on the job for anyone in the workplace, they will easily tell you that once your degree is, 10 years old, how much of it are you actually using? What you've had a platform to build on, which is wonderful. But what you're now using is the practical learning and experience that you have gained real time in doing the job.
Yeah.
So I think that is a level of awareness that needs to be front of mind for employers. And I would also add that to look at the ethical aspect, that it would be fair to look at it and say, but if we're employing someone, who's somewhat older, that degree anyway would have been years ago. It's not irrelevant.
Yeah.
It is simply not the be-all and end-all.
I want to conclude the conversation on role modeling in our country because we live in a society, yes, there is a massive competition for jobs because there's high unemployment out there. The people that commit this kind of fraud, particularly at a senior level, you've had the mayor of the city of Johannesburg admitting that he has an equivalent of a standard 10, actually. The impact of that, Cynthia, on young minds who are impressionable. Remember, we live in a society that corruption has almost been entrenched. And if that is allowed to continue, it's going to be a struggle to undo it. You only have to look at corruption everywhere.
Indeed.
I refuse to place corruption only in the public sector because the private sector is said to be the corrupter.
Indeed. Two-party game, that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the final question is, how do we stem this so that young people know and understand that if I do this, I will be committing a crime and I will condemn myself in the future.
Indeed. Do you know, I think your point of role modeling is such a profound point in a society where we are facing a great dearth of ethics, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And here, I don't mean the role model only of that very senior political figure, of that hugely successful business person. I mean the role model in our home and in our community. And that all of us need to more actively recognize that we can fulfill that role, that we can be the one that says, let's just pause here. Let's just think ahead. What are the long-term costs for this apparent possible short-term benefit?
Yeah.
And so I think that role model aspect applies across many dimensions of ethics, but it can and should not only portray what is correct behavior, it should bring with it the guidance of saying, let's pause, don't rush into this. Try and add that wisdom and guidance that looks at the longer-term cost and tries to create someone who sets a better example.
Cynthia Schoeman, let me thank you very much for making the time to come and discuss this. She is the Managing Director of the Ethics Monitoring and Management Services. Thanks indeed for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right.